Hi, Year 7, and welcome to this next little extract from Oliver Twist. I hope you're enjoying them. I think they're really fun. I love the Oliver Twist story. And it's so good to read such a classic piece of literature. So, in between the last extract and this one, Oliver has had a falling out with one of Mr. Sowerberry, that's the undertaker, one of his employees, who'd been taunting Oliver about his dead mother. Not very nice. After they got into a fight, Mr. Sowerberry punished Oliver, beating him. Oliver decides to run away, not back to the workhouse, but to London. He walks until he is about ready to collapse, when the very friendly, artful Dodger finds him and offers him a hand and a stolen loaf of bread. It is Dodger who introduces Oliver to Fagin. What is Fagin really like? Well, let's read on. What clues can you find about Fagin in this text? Highlight them as you read. Now, I've already started doing some of my highlighting, but why not get your highlighter to ready? And I've got a pen as well, because I like to make inferences down the side as I read. It helps me keep track of what I'm looking at and helps me make connections across the text as well. If you haven't got a pen or a highlighter, go and get them now and then come back. Ready? Fantastic. The walls and ceiling of the room were perfectly black with age and dirt. There was a deal table before the fire, upon which were a candle stuck in a ginger beer bottle, 2 or 3 pewter pots, a loaf and butter, and a plate. In a frying pan, which was on the fire, and which was secured to the mantel-shelf by a string, some sausages were cooking. And standing over them, with a toasting fork in his hand, was a very old, shrivelled Jew, whose villainous-looking and repulsive face was obscured by a quantity of matted red hair. He was dressed in a greasy flannel gown, with his throat bare, and seemed to be dividing his attention between the frying pan and the clothes horse, over which a great number of silk handkerchiefs were hanging. Several rough beds made of old sacks were huddled side by side on the floor. Seated round the table were 4 or 5 boys, none older than the Dodger, smoking long clay pipes and drinking spirits with the air of middle-aged men. These all crowded about their associate, that is Dodger, as he whispered a few words to the Jew, and then turned round and grinned at Oliver. So did the Jew himself, toasting fork in hand. Okay, so in that first paragraph, what can we pick out that shows us about Fagin and how he lives? So I've picked out walls black with age and dirt. I put unclean. Maybe he's even living in a slum. A slum is a poor area of a city. It's often got dilapidated housing, which means it's literally falling down around you, and it's probably not got mains drainage, very little has in this era, so there might not be running water. You might have to go to a pump outside, and that means often people living there would be living in very unhygienic conditions. I wonder if that's where he's living. What else might we notice? Well, I can see that there's not much on the table. A deal table is where you might play cards. It's small, it's low, and it's just a candle in a beer bottle, ginger beer, loaf, butter, plate, and some sausages. It's pretty sparse. So I said little furnishing. It's quite simple food, bread, butter, and sausage. Cheap. I wonder if Fagin's actually quite poor. Now he's got a toasting fork. He looks villainous and repulsive. I would highlight those, because those are really important adjectives. And this is an interesting image that's repeated down here, toasting fork in hand. Maybe have a think about it. A toasting fork, I don't know if you've ever used one. It's obviously longer than a dinner fork, considerably smaller than a pitchfork, but it looks very much like a pitchfork, so it's often got a long handle and these spaced out tines are called, of a fork, or prongs. So I think probably he's rather meant to look like the devil, who is often depicted as holding a pitchfork. So we've got someone who looks a bit like the devil, who looks really villainous. Villainous means evil. And he also looks repulsive. Ugh, he's so ugly. It's disgusting. What about his manner and appearance? Well, it might strike you that this word here, greasy, that's probably suggesting he's not washing his clothes. There's lots of sausage fat spattered on it. We've also got a throat bare. That may sound like an odd observation because we often have our throats bare now, but in that period it would be unusual not to wear a necktie. In fact, it would be considered probably a bit unhygienic because you often perspire around your neck, and that's part of the way you keep your shirt collars nice. So he's not wearing any ties, but informally dressed. In fact, I think he looks like he's wearing a dressing gown, a flannel gown. And what about the furnishings? We notice that there's lots of handkerchiefs, a bit suspicious, and then there's rough beds made of old sacks. Think of a sack that you'd keep potatoes in, or perhaps flour, or made of sort of rough hessian material. Probably not dissimilar to the sort of bedding Oliver would have had at the workhouse, but probably a suggestion that that's how the boys are sleeping, is just on old fabric sacks. And indeed, there are 4 or 5 boys. And they're not much older than Dodger. I think Dodger's meant to be about 13, so not much older than you. But they're smoking and drinking spirits. Spirits means alcoholic beverages, probably something cheap like gin, was widely available in Victorian Britain. Om nom nom. And they're doing so with the age of middle-aged men. Oh, that's very strange. What does that tell us about Fagin? He's got lots of boys, they're sort of sleeping in makeshift beds, and they're behaving like men. Well, I might infer that Fagin is possibly asking these young men to grow up and probably to work, because their behaviour suggests that they're no longer children, they're not innocent. And now we have this bit here with all like whispering, and then they turn around and grin. Grin just means to smile, but it means to smile extra wide. And in this case, it seems a little bit at odds with the whispering. Why would you whisper? Are they keeping something a secret? Are they being honest with Oliver? Well, they all grin at him, and there might be some suggestion that they're using Oliver for their own profit. So far we have Fagin is poor. He's a little bit like the devil. He's very ugly. His home shows signs of poverty with little furnishing, cheap food, and the boys that live with him seem to have to work for a living. Let's read on a little. This is Fagin, said Jack Dawkins. That's the Artful Dodger's real name. My friend Oliver Twist. The Jew grinned, and making a low obeisance, that means bowing, to Oliver, took him by the hand, and hoped he should have the honour of his intimate acquaintance. Upon this, the young gentleman with the pipes came round him, and shook both his hands very hard, especially the one in which he held his little bundle. So he's got a little, imagine you tie your stuff up in a rag or handkerchief, and then you put it on the end of a stick, and they're trying to get his handful of small possessions out of him. I don't know if that's friendly or not. One young gentleman was very anxious to hang up his cap for him, and another was so obliging as to put his hands in his pockets in order that, as he was very tired, he might not have the trouble of emptying them himself. When he went to bed, these civilities, if you're being civil, you're being friendly and polite, would probably extend much further, so they'd probably be more helpful, but for a liberal exercise of the Jew's toasting forks on the heads and shoulders of the affectionate youths who offered them. So Shylock goes around with his toasting fork, bashing them on the heads and tapping them on the shoulders and saying stop, because I think he's a bit concerned they're being friendly and polite, actually not being helpful. They seem to be stealing, in fact. Maybe Fagin is also a thief. Notice the bundle, his cap, his pockets, anything of value that Oliver has, they're trying to take off him. Interesting. Right, last 3 paragraphs. What can we find about Fagin here? Oh, we are very glad to see you, Oliver, very, said the Jew. Dodger, take off the sausages and draw a tub near the fire for Oliver. Ah, you're staring at the pocket handkerchiefs, eh, my dear? There are a good many of them, ain't there? We've just stuck them out, ready for the wash, that's all, Oliver. That's all. The latter part of this speech was hailed by a boisterous shout from all the hopeful pupils of the merry old gentleman. in the midst of which they went to supper. Supper is just another word for a meal, usually an evening meal. What's going on with these pocket handkerchiefs? If you're not sure what a handkerchief is, it's just a square of fabric, and it's basically a reusable tissue. Now we use tissues and throw them away. Then they would keep them, and they were made of fabric. You keep them in your pocket, fold them up. They look really pretty if you have them in bright colours, and they're actually quite expensive if they're made of silk. Silk is a very, very fine, soft fabric. So in amidst this squalid, dirty, horrid apartment, there's all these beautiful silk handkerchiefs. Where might they have come from? Now, I'm just going to put a note here. Dickens used the word Jew a lot, and actually he's drawing on anti-Semitic stereotypes of the scheming Jew to create his villain. Now, these ideas are not true. They're perpetuated through literature, and a stereotype means it's just an idea, and it kind of puts someone in a box and says you have to fit into that. And in this case, it's not a box you'd want to be in. And that's really sad, but it's part of our literary history that these characters appear. But when we read them now, we have to recognise it's not real, it's just made up, and it expresses the prejudice of the time. Let's read the last little bit then. So we think, so we've got lots of handkerchiefs, maybe they've been stolen, and he's clearly brushing over the slightly suspicious nature of that with a little comment and a laugh, and all the boys laugh with him. Oliver sits down to eat with them. Oliver ate his share, and the Jew then mixed him a glass of hot gin and water, telling him he must drink it off directly because another gentleman wanted a tumbler. Oliver did as he was desired. Immediately afterwards he felt himself gently lifted onto one of the sacks. Then he sunk into a deep sleep. Now, hot water and gin probably would make a small child sleep. In fact, you shouldn't really feed children alcohol. And it's interesting they want him to sleep. Possibly he needs the rest, and they're caring for him. Possibly it's also more convenient than having to talk to Oliver. So overall, Fagin seems really friendly, but it also strikes the audience, or the readers, that not everything may be quite as Oliver perceived it. When you perceive something, it's the way you understand it with your mind, but perception can be flawed because we filter it through what we know, and Oliver doesn't know much about the world. It seems filth, poverty, and dishonesty and crime are emerging as important themes in this part of the story. So poverty, being poor, dishonesty, crime, and I put filth there as well. Everything's really grimy. Fantastic. Right, now you've read it through, go and have a go at the quiz on forms.